Sometimes a man builds something meant to last generations, and sometimes he hides truth so deep only blood can find it. May 1st, 1977, Augustus Hartwell sat alone in his office at Hartwell Steel, watching the reel-to-reel recorder spin in the amber lamplight. The machine clicked in Word, capturing every word Sterling Crow had spoken 2 hours earlier in this same room. The Swiss accounts are ready, final asset transfers complete by month's end. Hartwell Steel's most valuable equipment liquidated through shell companies. Nobody will notice until too late. Augustus leaned close to the microphone he'd hidden beneath his desk. This is insurance. If you're listening to this years from now, Sterling, you forced my hand. But truth always finds its way to light. His fingers worked the tape free, sealing it inside a waterproof military case. Black permanent marker across the lid. For the air. The footsteps in the hallway made him slide the case into his desk drawer just as Sterling opened the door without knocking. Working late, Augustus? The smile didn't reach his eyes. Just finishing quarterly reports. Sterling moved closer, expensive cologne mixing with the machine oil smell that permeated everything in this building. You have until Friday to sign the buyout. Otherwise, accidents happen. Augustus said nothing, but his eyes held steady on the man who'd been his partner for 20 years. The man who'd shared bourbon and blueprints and dreams of building something that mattered. Sterling's reflection in the window showed something Augustus had missed for too long. Greed wore a patient face until it didn't need to anymore. Friday came. Augustus Hartwell drove to the mill, parked his Buick in his usual spot, and walked into the gathering dusk. He never came back. The Buick sat there for 3 days before anyone thought to check inside. Empty, keys gone, no blood, no note, no body. Just another mystery in a town that would collect them like rust. 45 years later, a different kind of rust was claiming Detroit. Thaddeus Brennan sat at a kitchen table that wobbled on the uneven floor of his 4th-story walk-up, threading a needle through leather that smelled like his childhood. His son's baseball glove had split along the palm, where 3 years of hope and sweat had finally worn through the stitching. The afternoon sun created one perfect rectangle of light on carpet so worn the pattern had surrendered to gray. Through paper-thin walls came the neighbor's television, a baby crying 2 floors up, the constant Detroit symphony of sirens and bass lines and engines that never quite started. Desmond appeared in the doorway, 8 years old and backlit like a question mark. Is it fixed yet, Dad? Almost there, buddy. This old leather just needs patience. Thaddeus knotted the thread and trimmed it with the pocket knife his grandfather had given him 30 years ago. The knife had 3 generations of thumb-worn brass, smooth as riverstone. They don't make them like they used to. This glove should have lasted until high school. Desmond grinned, a gap where his front tooth was still growing in. Like Brennan houses, right? That's right. Brennan houses stand forever. The words tasted like ash in Thaddeus's mouth. Brennan Construction had built houses across 3 states for 3 generations. Grandfather with nothing but a hammer and a reputation. Father with commercial properties and contracts. Thaddeus had taken it to 30 employees in projects from Detroit to Indianapolis before the financial collapse came like a late winter freeze, killing everything that had seemed so alive just months before. 8 months unemployed now. The stack of rejection letters on the counter had stopped growing because he'd stopped applying. No one needed craftsmen who understood crown molding profiles from 1886. They needed cheap and fast, particle board and vinyl, houses that would stand just long enough for the warranty to expire. His phone showed $127.83. Rent was $850, due in 5 days. The shutoff notice from Detroit Edison sat next to a jar of coins Desmond didn't know existed. The knock on the door carried an official weight that made Thaddeus's stomach clench. But it wasn't the landlord. Miriam Blackwood stood in the hallway with a cream-colored envelope thick as a paperback book. Her silver hair was pulled into the same practical bun she'd worn every day since Thaddeus was 10. since his grandfather's funeral when she'd brought casseroles and quiet comfort. "Mr. Brennan, this came for you. Mailman put it in my box by mistake." The envelope felt expensive between his fingers. Heavy paper with a texture like fine linen. No printed label, just a typewriter's mechanical precision. Thaddeus Daniel Brennan, and an address he hadn't given anyone in 2 years. The return address read, Caldwell and Sons, Attorneys at Law, Ashmont, Indiana. A wax seal in dark blue bore an embossed H. Ashmont. "That's where your grandfather came from, isn't it?" Miriam's eyes held something he couldn't name. Not quite pity, not quite knowledge, something older than both. "You knew Grandpa Howard?" "I worked for Howard Brennan 3 summers before I married." Miriam touched the envelope like it might burn. "He spoke of Ashmont sometimes, never happily." "I don't know anyone in Ashmont. Grandpa Howard died when I was 10. Perhaps someone there remembers the Brennan family." Her hand found his arm, gentle but firm. "Good families are remembered, Mr. Brennan, even after they're gone." She returned to her apartment, leaving Thaddeus holding a question he couldn't yet read. Desmond was already reaching for it. Perpetual optimism shining in eyes that looked too much like his mother's. "What is it? Are we rich now?" Thaddeus managed a smile. "Probably just legal thing about Grandpa's old business." The pocket knife slit the envelope with the same care he'd use on antique molding. Inside, legal documents bound with a blue ribbon. A cover letter on stationery that predated computers. He read it aloud so Desmond could follow, because his son deserved to understand their life as it happened, not filtered through adult lies about everything being fine. "Dear Mr. Brennan, this firm represents the estate of Augustus Hartwell, deceased or legally declared such. Per Mr. Hartwell's last will and testament, executed 1975, you are named sole heir to his estate in Ashmont, Indiana. The estate consists primarily of Hartwell Manor, a Victorian mansion built 1886, plus 12 acres and a small trust fund sufficient for 1 year of property taxes. The property has been vacant approximately 30 years. Mr. Hartwell left specific instructions that the estate pass only to the craftsman of Brennan blood when times of trial bring him home. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to claim your inheritance. Respectfully, Jonathan Caldwell III, Esquire." Desmond's excitement filled the cramped apartment. "We inherited a mansion, a real mansion like in movies. Says here it's been vacant 30 years. That's never good for buildings. But it's free, right? And you can fix anything." The boy bounced on his toes, imagination already furnishing rooms he'd never seen, solving problems that didn't exist yet. "Can we go see it? Please? It's like we were chosen." Thaddeus did the mathematics while his son dreamed. $127. 5 days. No prospects. 23 rejection letters, and a city that had stopped calling him back. The inheritance could be a money pit or a miracle, but it was something, more than he had sitting here watching the walls close in. "Let me make some calls, buddy. We'll see what this is about." That night, after Desmond's breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep, Thaddeus opened his laptop. The connection was slow, subsidized internet that buffered more than it streamed. He typed Augustus Hartwell, Ashmont, Indiana, into the search bar and waited for the pass to load. The top result was a newspaper archive, digitized but barely readable. "Steel mill owner vanishes amid fraud allegations." Ashmont Chronicle, May 17, 1977. Augustus Hartwell, 47, co-owner of Hartwell Steel, has disappeared following accusations of embezzlement from business partner Sterling Crow. They're finding Hartwell's car abandoned at the mill parking lot. Investigation ongoing. Crow alleges Hartwell siphoned $2.8 million to offshore accounts over 7 years. "I trusted him like a brother. This betrayal devastates not just me, but our 2,000 employees. Hartwell's whereabouts unknown. Family declined comment." The photograph next to the article stopped Thaddeus cold. black and white, grainy from age and scanning, but unmistakable. Augustus Hartwell could have been his reflection in 30 years. Same jaw, same eyes, same way of standing like the camera was an obligation, not an opportunity. Morning brought Miriam's door opening before he could knock. She must have heard his footsteps, or maybe she'd been waiting. The newspaper article glowed on his phone screen between them. Did you know about this? Miriam studied the screen, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. I knew Howard came from Ashmont. I knew he never spoke of it. She gestured Thaddeus inside, into an apartment that smelled like lavender and old books. And I knew that when your father Daniel turned 18, he received a letter. What letter? From a woman named Evangeline, about his real parents. Miriam settled into a chair that had held her for decades. Daniel made me promise never to tell you. He wanted to protect you from complicated history. Complicated how? That's not my story to tell anymore. But this inheritance, she touched the legal papers he'd brought. Augustus Hartwell waited for you specifically, Thaddeus, not a random heir, you. Miriam rose, moved to the window where Detroit sprawled below them like a promise that had expired. When Daniel got that letter at 18, he cried for 2 days. Then he burned it. Said some legacies are better left buried. She turned and her eyes held the weight of kept secrets. But Augustus clearly believed differently. He believed someday the right person would come to Ashmont. The question is, are you that person? Or will you burn this inheritance like your father burned the truth? Desmond's voice came from the doorway. Dad, I think we should go. Something's waiting for us there. Buddy, you heard Mrs. Blackwood. My father wanted this buried. But Mr. Hartwell wanted it found. By you. The 8-year-old wisdom cut through adult complications. Maybe Dad was wrong to burn stuff. Maybe we're supposed to find what he couldn't. 2 days later, everything Thaddeus owned fit in a pickup truck. The landlord had been surprisingly understanding. Furniture went to storage, $89 a month he could afford for exactly 2 months. Tools filled the truck bed, wrapped in tarps against weather and thieves. Every possession reduced to what mattered, the ability to build, and the boy who gave him reason to. Interstate 69 carried them south, metropolitan sprawl giving way to farmland, to small towns that looked like time had simply stopped checking in. Desmond read from a library book about Indiana steel towns, facts tumbling out between bites of gas station sandwiches. Did you know Ashmont used to be famous for steel? Hartwell Steel made girders for Chicago's tallest buildings in the 1960s. Grandpa Howard would have known about that. He always said Midwest Steel built America. Book says the mill closed 1979. Town lost 60% of its population. Desmond looked up from the page, serious in a way that made him seem older. Dad, why do towns die? When factories close, people follow the work, like we're doing now. Are we running away? Thaddeus reached across the bench seat, squeezed his son's shoulder. No, buddy, we're not running. We're following an opportunity. Big difference. Ashmont appeared around a bend like a photograph from his grandparents' attic. Main Street held the bones of prosperity. Red brick buildings from 1880s and 90s, when people built things to outlast themselves. Johnson's Pharmacy, with hand-painted signage, faded to cotton candy pink. Maggie's Diner, where red vinyl booths were visible through plate glass windows that hadn't been washed in months, maybe years. Silas Crawford Hardware, with genuine wood floors Thaddeus could see from the street, the kind of floors that creaked in a specific pattern, that told you where to step in the dark. But half the storefronts were empty. For rent signs yellowed in windows like surrender flags. American flags hung from light poles, some torn, none new. The war memorial in the town square stood surrounded by dead flowers and grass that hadn't been cut since spring. A few people moved on the sidewalks, mostly elderly, moving with the careful deliberation of those who knew every crack in every sidewalk because they've been walking them for 70 years. It's like a ghost town from movies. Not ghost town, just sleeping, waiting. Cordelia's general store occupied what had been the pharmacy building before someone decided to consolidate. The interior was narrow aisles and wooden shelving, oak that Thaddeus recognized by the grain, by the way it had darkened over decades. The smell was wood polish and fresh bread and coffee that had been sitting since morning. Linoleum worn smooth in pathways where generations had walked the same route from door to counter to bread aisle to register. The woman behind the counter looked up before Thaddeus could speak. "You must be the Brennan boy." Not a question, a statement delivered with absolute certainty. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, blue eyes sharp enough to cut glass, hands that had seen decades of work, weathered but still capable. She wore a simple cardigan, practical shoes, the uniform of women who built lives from necessity rather than choice. "How did you—" "Miriam Blackwood called yesterday. Said you were coming to claim Hartwell Manor." Cordelia Hayes studied him with an intensity that felt like being measured for something he didn't understand. "You look like a Brennan. Same build as your grandfather, Howard. He was a good man, stubborn as a mule, but honest." "You knew my grandfather?" Everyone knew everyone back then. Ashmont was a proper community before the mill closed. Sadness crossed her face like a cloud. Now we're just hanging on. 800 people left, most over 60. She turned her attention to Desmond, and her expression softened in the way only children could manage. "And you must be the youngest Brennan. What's your name, young man?" "Desmond Brennan, ma'am." "Do you know about the mansion? Is it really big?" "Certainly is. Biggest house in the county. 15 rooms, if I recall. Been sitting empty 30 years, though. Don't expect grandeur." Thaddeus selected bread and milk, basics to get them through the first day. "Did you know Augustus Hartwell?" Cordelia's hands paused for just a moment, ringing up the groceries. "As well as anyone, I suppose. Augustus and Sterling Crow built this town into something special. Good jobs, good wages. People were proud to work Hartwell Steel." She bagged items with practiced efficiency. Then May of '77, Augustus just vanished. Left his car in the mill parking lot, never seen again. Mrs. Blackwood said Mr. Hartwell disappeared. What happened? There was talk, of course, rumors he'd embezzled money, but those who knew Augustus never believed it. Her voice hardened on the next words. "And Sterling Crow took over the mill entirely after Augustus disappeared. Ran it into the ground within 2 years. Sold equipment, cut pensions, moved production overseas. Typical story these days, but it was shocking back then." As they were leaving, Cordelia touched Thaddeus's arm. "There are two kinds of people who come to Ashmont these days, Mr. Brennan. Those looking to uncover the past and those trying to bury it." Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I'm still not sure which kind you are." Loading groceries into the truck, Desmond pointed across the street. "Dad, that car's been following us." A black Mercedes, windows tinted dark, engine running. The driver was on his phone, looking directly at them. Not hiding, wanting to be seen. Then the car pulled away, slow and deliberate, leaving nothing but questions in its wake. Elm Street wound uphill through trees that had been saplings when the mansion was built. They created a tunnel effect, branches meeting overhead, dappling the road with shadows that moved like water. The curve came sudden, and then Hartwell Manor appeared. 3 stories of Victorian ambition rose behind a wrought iron fence gone orange with rust. 2 turrets marked the corners like sentries who'd abandoned their posts decades ago. The mansard roof showed gaps where slate tiles had fallen, giving it a gap-toothed grin against the Indiana sky. Paint that had once been cream now peeled in great curling sheets, hanging like birch bark. The wraparound porch sagged in places, ornate balusters broken or missing entirely. Windows, 42 that Thaddeus counted automatically, his craftsman's eye cataloging even while his heart tried to process the scale of it. "Wow." Desmond's voice held wonder and uncertainty in equal measure. "What do you think, buddy? It looks sad, like it's been waiting for someone to come home." Thaddeus knelt to his son's level, looking at the mansion through 8-year-old eyes. Then he looked again with the eyes his grandfather had trained, seeing past decay to structure. The foundation was local limestone, solid as the day it was quarried. No settling visible in the walls. Structural timbers visible through one broken window appeared sound. The roof sagged slightly, but hadn't collapsed. Corbels under the eaves were intact, showing intricate carving. Good bones, cosmetic damage, salvageable. The front door key was brass, heavy in his palm, scrollwork elaborate enough to be art. The lock was original hardware, keyhole plate the size of his hand. He inserted the key, felt it slide home with the precision of master craftsmanship. Turned it. The click echoed internal mechanisms that had been waiting 45 years for this moment. The door weighed 200 pounds of solid oak, 3 inches thick. It opened with a creak that was less sound than memory, the voice of a house remembering how to breathe. The entry hall took that breath away. Light streamed through stained glass panels flanking the door, throwing colored shadows across white oak floors 12 inches wide. The grand staircase curved upward along the left wall, walnut banister gleaming dully under dust that had settled like snow. Crown molding ran the perimeter, 14 feet up, an 8-inch profile, hand-carved with such precision that Thaddeus could see the craftsman's chisel marks, intentional texture that machines couldn't replicate. Wainscoting rose 4 feet, panel frame panel pattern in oak that matched the floors. Above it, wallpaper in sage green florals, faded now to something between memory and ghost. The chandelier was gone from the ceiling medallion, stolen or sold, but the medallion itself remained. Plasterwork showing interlocking circles, a pattern Thaddeus would remember later. The house smelled of dust and aged wood and something sweet underneath, lavender perhaps, sachets placed by hands that had been dust themselves for decades. His footstep on the first floorboard produced a creak, G-sharp if he had to name it. Desmond's lighter weight created a higher note. The house was playing itself like an instrument, announcing their presence to rooms that had held nothing but silence for longer than Thaddeus had been alive. He reached out, touched the banister, dust thick as velvet under his fingers. But the wood beneath was still hard, still true. Walnut didn't forgive sloppy joinery, demanded respect from anyone who worked it. Whoever built this staircase had given that respect. Whoever built this understood something. Desmond, come here. What, Dad? That buildings aren't just shelter, they're statements. He ran his hand along the doorframe, showing his son the dovetail joints visible where the trim met the jamb. Every joint, every detail, they're saying this was built to matter. This was built to last when the people who made it were long forgotten. The parlor drew Desmond like gravity. The crystal chandelier still hung there, somehow surviving when everything else of value had been stripped. Hundreds of prisms caught the afternoon sun slanting through tall windows, throwing rainbow fractals across walls and floor and ceiling. Desmond stood beneath it, bathed in colored light, and for a moment Thaddeus could see the mansion as it had been. Could imagine Augustus Hartwell standing in this exact spot, watching his own child play in the same kaleidoscope of color. The fireplace mantel was Carrara marble, gray with veins of gold. Carved acanthus leaves and rosettes showed the work of someone who understood that stone was just another language, one that spoke across centuries if you learned to read it. Above the mantel, a mirror in mercury-backed glass, miraculously unbroken, reflected the room in silvered tones that made everything look underwater. The dining room held a mahogany table that could seat 12, still gleaming under its shroud of dust. Built-in china cabinets lined one wall, original wavy glass intact. The ceiling medallion here showed the same interlocking circles pattern, plasterwork that would have taken weeks to complete. Thaddeus made a mental note without knowing why. His grandfather had taught him that details repeated for a reason. In the kitchen, the cabinetry was all original, built-in work that rivaled the front rooms. Walk-in pantry with floor-to-ceiling shelving, cast iron sink with porcelain coating chipped but functional. The stove was gone, sold or stolen, but everything else remained. Thaddeus noticed that the craftsmanship here matched the formal spaces. Rare in an era when kitchens were servants' domain, built cheap and hidden. But Augustus Hartwell, or whoever designed this house, had believed the unseen parts mattered as much as the showpieces. Upstairs yielded 6 bedrooms, each with its own character. The master suite occupied the entire east wing. Bay window in the sitting area. Bedroom 20 by 24, Thaddeus estimated. Ensuite bathroom with a clawfoot tub, cast iron with no chips, deep enough for soaking away a long day's work. The closet was cedar-lined, and impossibly, the smell was still there. Sharp and clean, fighting back decades. The tower room stopped them both. Circular walls following the turret's interior. 4 windows facing the cardinal directions. From here, the entirety of Ashmont was visible. The town spread below them in an orderly grid. To the west, the abandoned mill complex squatted like a monument to broken promises. East showed the river, a silver ribbon threading through trees. South was farmland stretching toward a horizon that seemed impossibly distant. "This is my room." Desmond's voice held certainty that Thaddeus wouldn't argue with. "Can this really be ours?" "If we can make it work, buddy, it'll take everything we've got." As sunset approached, they brought their duffel bags inside. Thaddeus noticed things his son didn't. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel, not from his truck. Footprints in the porch dust, too recent to have survived the rain 2 days ago. In the library, one book lying open on a writing desk, no dust on its pages. Someone had been here, recently. He said nothing, not wanting to frighten Desmond, but his hand checked his pocket for the truck keys out of instinct older than thought. They slept that first night in the library, sleeping bags on hardwood floors. Tall windows let in moonlight that turned everything silver. Leather-bound books surrounded them on shelves that reached 12 feet up. Thaddeus lay awake long after his son's breathing settled into sleep's rhythm. The house creaked and settled around them, adjusting to new weight, new warmth, new purpose. An owl called outside, its cry echoing across overgrown gardens. Morning came with Desmond already awake, pulling books from shelves with the systematic approach of someone on a mission. He found the newspaper clipping tucked between 2 volumes of Dickens. Steel mill owner missing after fraud allegations. Ashmont Chronicle, May 17, 1977. Thaddeus read it aloud while his son listened, learning their family history through newsprint that had turned the color of weak tea. The article was one-sided, 8 paragraphs of Sterling Crow's accusations. Zero defense for Augustus. No investigation, no balance, just a man tried and convicted in the court of public opinion without ever being present for his own hearing. "Do you think he really stole money?" "I've learned newspapers don't always tell whole story, buddy." Thaddeus folded the clipping carefully. "Let's not judge a man we never met based on one article." He'd planned to assess the mansion's damage room by room, starting with the parlor. A practical approach to an overwhelming task. Desmond helped, the 2 of them wiping down wainscoting with damp cloths, revealing oak's natural color beneath grime. The work was meditative, familiar, the kind of labor his hands understood even when his mind was elsewhere. The panel that didn't match revealed itself slowly. Same species of oak, but the grain ran vertical where surrounding panels ran horizontal. The color was slightly off, suggesting a different board from a different tree. The frame molding showed a gap, just 1/16 of an inch, but to eyes trained in precision, it might as well have been a canyon. "Desmond, come look at this." His son peered close, trying to see what Thaddeus saw. This panel was replaced, or added later. See how the grain runs vertical here, but horizontal on the next panel? Original carpenter wouldn't make that mistake. Someone changed this. Thaddeus pressed the panel gently. It moved, just 1/8 of an inch, but movement where there should have been none. He worked his fingers into the gap, feeling for the mechanism he knew had to be there. Resistance as small catches held fast. Then gentle pressure in the right place produced a soft pop. The panel swung inward on hinges someone had taken great care to conceal. The recess behind was 6 inches deep, lined with tin to protect against moisture. Inside, a single object wrapped in oilcloth that crinkled under Thaddeus's fingers. His hands shook slightly as he unwrapped it, adrenaline mixing with something deeper. Anticipation, maybe, or recognition that this moment was why he'd come. The brass key was 6 inches long, heavy as a river stone, shaped like nothing he'd ever seen in modern hardware stores. The head was formed as a heart, an inch and a half wide. The shaft spiraled with engraved patterns. The teeth were complex, 12 individual cuts suggesting a lock of Byzantine sophistication. But it was the symbols covering every surface that stopped his breath. A compass rose, tiny and precise, marked the heart's center. Interlocking circles wrapped the edge. Waves ran along the shaft. Architectural elements that might be buildings or columns. Numbers barely visible without magnification. The brass hadn't tarnished. The oilcloth had protected it, or perhaps it had never been used, only hidden. The weight felt substantial, made to last, made to matter. Wow, like a pirate treasure. What does it unlock? They spent an hour trying every lock in the mansion. Front door, too ornate. Bedroom doors, wrong size entirely. Desk drawers, none locked. Closets without locks. Basement door with its modern padlock added decades after the key was made. Nothing fit. If it doesn't open anything, what's it for? Thaddeus studied the key under lamplight, craftsman's eye cataloging details. Then he saw it. The compass rose carved into the key matched exactly the compass rose carved into the staircase newel post. The interlocking circles matched the dining room ceiling medallion. The heart shape matched the stained glass by the front door. This isn't a key for a lock, it's a map. Augustus Hartwell left us a trail. The knock at the door came with Cordelia's voice calling out a greeting. She carried a casserole dish, proper meal for people who'd been living on bread and hope. But when she saw the key in Thaddeus's hand, her expression changed. Just for a moment. Recognition, quickly masked, but he caught it. Found something in the walls, I see. Do you recognize it? She took the key, examining it with hands that already knew its weight, and Thaddeus understood she'd seen it before, or heard of it, or had been waiting for this exact moment. Augustus was fond of puzzles, symbolism. She returned the key like it might burn. He believed a man's true legacy isn't what he leaves behind, but what he builds to last. Her next words carried weight beyond their meaning. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what can be spent, but what can be understood. The sound of an engine outside cut through whatever she might have said next. The black Mercedes from town, parking deliberately in full view. This time the driver emerged. The man who stepped from the Mercedes wore wealth-like armor. Charcoal suit cut to measurements most men only saw in magazines. Silver threaded his temples, premature for someone Thaddeus estimated at mid-40s. The kind of gray that came from stress rather than time. Shoes polished to mirrors caught the afternoon sun as he approached the porch where Thaddeus stood holding the brass key. Cordelia had moved to the doorway, her body language shifting from welcoming to protective in the space of a heartbeat. Mr. Brennan. The voice carried boardroom confidence, the practiced warmth of someone who'd learned to sell things people didn't know they needed. Lucian Crow, chief executive of Crow Enterprises. I wanted to introduce myself, neighbor to neighbor. The handshake was firm without being aggressive, professional without being warm. Lucian's eyes moved past Thaddeus into the entry hall, cataloging details with the speed of someone who'd thought about this house for a very long time. Up close, his hazel eyes held something that looked like permanent exhaustion, the kind that sleep couldn't fix. I understand you've recently inherited this property from Augustus Hartwell. News travels fast, small towns. Lucian smiled, but it didn't change the calculation happening behind his expression. I wanted to discuss a business proposition that might interest you. May I come in? Thaddeus stepped aside, watching Cordelia's face tighten with disapproval she didn't voice. Lucian wiped his shoes on the threshold, despite no Matt being present, a gesture of respect for the house itself that seemed genuine. He moved through the entry hall like someone visiting a grave, his gaze lingering on the staircase, the wainscoting, the stained glass throwing colored patterns across worn floorboards. They settled in the parlor where the chandelier still threw its rainbow fractals. Lucian perched on the edge of an antique chair, opening a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Thaddeus's truck. He extracted a folder thick with documents. "I'll be direct, Mr. Brennan. This house is a money pit. Restoration costs will run well into six figures, and that's assuming you don't discover major structural issues during the work." He slid a document across the dusty coffee table between them. "I'm prepared to offer $120,000, significantly above market value given the current condition." The number hung in the air like smoke. Enough to buy a decent house in a good school district, put Desmond through college, still have money left over for the emergencies that always came. After 8 months of rejection letters and dwindling bank accounts, it was tempting in a way that made Thaddeus's chest tight. "That's generous." Lucian's expression suggested he'd expected this to be easier. "I've been monitoring this property for years. My company has conducted comprehensive assessments. The foundation has shifting issues on the west side. The electrical system is original knob and tube wiring, a fire hazard requiring complete replacement. The roof leaks in at least 7 places. Lead plumbing throughout needs updating to meet code. I could continue, but you understand the scope of what you're facing." "How do you know all this?" "Crow Enterprises has been acquiring properties in Ashmont for the past decade. We've had engineers assess every significant building in town. This mansion has been high on our acquisition list, but Augustus Hartwell's unusual will made that challenging until now." Desmond appeared in the doorway, drawn by unfamiliar voices. He stood there in worn jeans and a shirt 2 sizes too big, hand-me-down from a cousin who'd outgrown it years ago. Lucian's expression softened when he noticed the boy, something genuine breaking through the corporate veneer. "We like this house. It feels like it was waiting for us." "I understand the appeal, young man. Old houses have character." Lucian's voice carried kindness that seemed to cost him something. "But they also have secrets, not all of them pleasant." He turned back to Thaddeus, and the warmth evaporated. "Did you know Augustus Hartwell disappeared under a cloud of suspicion? Financial fraud? Embezzlement from the mill? There were even rumors about an affair with his business partner's wife." Thaddeus felt something protective rise in his chest, for Augustus and for the boy watching this exchange. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Crow, but we're not ready to sell. We need time to consider our options." Lucian closed his briefcase with a decisive click that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "Of course, take your time." His card went into the folder along with the formal offer. "Just keep in mind, Mr. Brennan, that sentiment can be expensive. This offer is generous because we value the land. If the house deteriorates further, that value decreases." At the door he paused, looking up at the grand staircase one more time. "It's a shame, really. In its day, this was the finest house in the county. But Augustus Hartwell left more than a house behind when he vanished. He left a legacy of questions that have haunted this town for decades." His gaze settled on Thaddeus with uncomfortable intensity. "Be careful you don't inherit those ghosts along with these walls." The Mercedes pulled away, gravel crunching under expensive tires. Cordelia remained in the doorway, arms crossed over her cardigan. "That man has been circling this property like a vulture for 20 years. Her voice carried steel underneath the southern lilt. "He won't take no for an answer easily. Why is this house so important to Crow Enterprises? Sometimes when a man disappears, he leaves questions behind. And sometimes the answers to those questions are worth more than the property they're hidden in." She moved to the window, watching the Mercedes disappear down Elm Street. "Augustus Hartwell and Sterling Crow built this town together. Then something went wrong between them. Whatever happened in 77, it changed Ashmont forever. And Lucian? Cordelia turned back, her expression carrying the weight of kept secrets finally finding their moment. There's something you need to know about who you really are, Thaddeus, about why Augustus left this house specifically to you. She retrieved a photograph from her handbag, handling it with the reverence reserved for holy relics. Summer of 72. The colors had faded to something between memory and dream. Augustus Hartwell stood tall and strong, dark hair showing the first threads of silver. Beside him, a woman with auburn hair and sad eyes. Between them, a small boy, maybe 5 years old, with Thaddeus's chin and Desmond's eyes, and a smile that suggested he didn't yet know the world could be cruel. The woman is Evangeline Crow, Sterling Crow's wife. Cordelia's voice was gentle, preparing him for impact. The boy is Daniel Brennan, your father. That's impossible. My father grew up in Detroit. His parents were Howard and Elizabeth Brennan. Howard and Elizabeth adopted Daniel when he was 6, after Evangeline sent him away for protection. Cordelia sat beside him, the photograph between them like evidence in a trial. Daniel was born in 67. Evangeline and Augustus had an affair, but she told Sterling the child was his. For 5 years they lived with that lie, but a child's features reveal truths over time. Daniel began looking more like Augustus. Sterling started suspecting. The room tilted slightly, reality reorganizing itself around this new truth. Evangeline feared Sterling's temper. She contacted Augustus, and together they arranged for Howard Brennan, Augustus's second cousin, to adopt Daniel. Move him to Detroit, give him a different life. It broke both their hearts, but they believed it was the only way to keep him safe. "Why didn't my father tell me?" Evangeline wrote to Daniel on his 18th birthday, explaining everything. By then, Augustus had disappeared. The scandal had died down. Cordelia touched the photograph gently, fingertips on faces frozen in time. What Daniel chose to do with that knowledge was his decision. Perhaps he wanted to protect you, just as his parents protected him. Desmond's voice came small from where he'd been listening. "So Augustus Hartwell was Dad's grandpa? Dad's real grandpa?" "Yes, sweetheart, which makes him your great-grandfather. And it makes Thaddeus the rightful heir Augustus was waiting for." The numbers on the key. Thaddeus pulled it from his pocket, examining the faint engravings with new understanding. May 10th, 67, Daniel's birthday. Augustus encoded everything, every clue tied to family. Cordelia stood, moving toward the door. "There's more you should know. Sterling Crow died in a yacht explosion in 85. Circumstances were suspicious. Some said accident, some said suicide. Few whispered darker possibilities. And Lucian? Sterling adopted him when he married Lucian's mother in 76. The boy was born that same year. Never knew any father but Sterling. After Sterling died, after Evangeline killed herself 7 years later, Lucian became obsessed with the Hartwell legacy. He believes Augustus destroyed his family. The weight of it settled over Thaddeus like snow. Generations of secrets, lies told to protect children who grew into adults carrying wounds they didn't understand. This changes everything. Does it? Cordelia paused at the threshold. You're still you. Desmond is still Desmond. This house is still waiting to be restored. The only difference is now you know why Augustus chose you. Blood and craft, Thaddeus. He needed someone with both. That evening, Thaddeus walked Main Street as the sun painted Ashmont in shades of amber. The diner was still open, red booths visible through windows that needed washing. He found Silas Crawford inside, finishing coffee that had gone cold while he read a contractor's journal. Silas was 60, weathered in the way of men who'd spent decades outside. His hands showed scars from every tool in the tradesman's arsenal. When he looked up, his eyes held the assessment Thaddeus recognized from every job interview he'd endured. You must be the Brennan boy. Cordelia called, said you might need work. I'm a carpenter, third generation. restoration specialist. Thaddeus's resume felt inadequate spoken aloud. I need income while I figure out what to do with the mansion. Can you match crown molding profiles from 1886? With hand tools or router, depending on what you need. Silas's expression shifted from polite to interested. Show me your hands. Thaddeus extended them, calloused, scarred from countless small mistakes and a few large ones. The right thumb showed where a chisel had slipped 15 years ago, leaving a scar that would never quite fade. These were working hands, honest in a way words couldn't be. I'm doing a Victorian restoration downtown. Robinson House. Owner wants original crown molding matched where water damage destroyed sections. Most guys today don't know how to read wood grain, don't understand why it matters. I do. 25 an hour, cash, weekly. Start tomorrow at 7. Silas extended his hand, and Thaddeus shook it, feeling the first solid ground he'd stood on in months. But that's not why I called Cordelia, asking her to send you my way. No? You'll need allies in this town, Mr. Brennan. Lucian Crowe has considerable influence. He owns 40% of commercial real estate, employs 200 people directly or through subsidiaries. When he wants something, he usually gets it. I'm not selling the mansion. Good. Silas's smile held approval. Augustus Hartwell was a better man than history remembers. It's about time someone set that record straight. The next morning, Thaddeus left Desmond with Cordelia, who'd offered to watch the boy while he worked. The Robinson House was 3 blocks from Main Street, a smaller Victorian showing the same craftsmanship as the mansion. The crown molding in the front parlor had a profile that would require careful measurement and multiple router passes. Thaddeus lost himself in the work, in the precision of matching wood to wood, in the satisfaction of restoration rather than mere replacement. At lunch, Sheriff Garrett Whitlock appeared, ostensibly to inspect the work permit, but clearly there for other reasons. He was 63, built solid like the brick buildings he'd spent his life protecting. His eyes missed nothing, cataloging Thaddeus's work with professional appreciation. Doing good work here. Most contractors these days would have used pre-made trim, charged full price, hope nobody noticed the difference. Not how I was raised. Brennan Construction had a reputation. My father worked with your grandfather on a municipal building back in '74. Said Howard Brennan was the only contractor who understood that quality was its own advertisement. Garrett settled onto a saw bench, casual but deliberate. Heard you met Lucian Crowe. Word travels. He'll increase his offer. Crowe Enterprises has plans for that hillside. Luxury condos with river views. Only thing standing in the way is your Victorian monstrosity. Why does he want it so badly? Men like Crowe don't explain themselves. But I'll tell you this, after Augustus disappeared, Sterling Crowe went through that mansion like Sherman through Georgia. Tore up floorboards, punched holes in walls, searching for something he never found. When Sterling died, Lucian continued the search. Legal means mostly. Tried to buy it through proxies, file liens, challenge the will. Nothing worked because Augustus's instructions were very specific. The craftsman of Brennan blood, when times of trial bring him home. You think whatever Augustus hid is still there? I think Augustus was smarter than Sterling gave him credit for. And I think you showing up after 45 years is exactly what the old man planned. That afternoon, Thaddeus returned to the mansion with new eyes. Desmond had spent the day helping Cordelia organize the kitchen, his excitement about the house undimmed by revelations of complicated family history. Together, they examined the brass key again, mapping its symbols to locations throughout the mansion. The compass rose carved into the staircase newel post was 6 inches in diameter, intricate enough to be a work of art rather than mere decoration. Thaddeus ran his fingers over it, feeling for the mechanism he knew had to exist. The center held a slight depression, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. He inserted the key's tip, felt its seat perfectly, turned it clockwise. A click deep within the post, counterclockwise. Grinding of machinery that hadn't moved in decades. The newel post rotated a quarter turn, and a panel on its side slid open. The compartment held a single piece of parchment, folded carefully and aged to the color of weak tea. Thaddeus unfolded it with surgeon's precision, afraid it might crumble under his fingers. The document showed a partial floor plan of the mansion, but with spaces that didn't exist on any blueprint. Hidden rooms, passages between walls, symbols from the key scattered across the drawing, connected by dotted lines suggesting a path. At the bottom, Augustus's spidery handwriting, "For the rightful heir, when the time comes to claim what was lost." It's a treasure map. Desmond's enthusiasm was infectious, cutting through the weight of everything else. Maybe. Or maybe just a mystery Augustus wanted solved. Either way, he's leading us somewhere. One symbol stood out, a heart marked clearly in what the map labeled as the master bedroom. But they'd been in that room. What had they missed? Where two hearts joined, truth lies buried beneath love's foundation. Thaddeus read the annotation aloud, turning the words over like stones in a river. Two hearts, love's foundation. That's the bedroom where married people sleep. They climbed the stairs as afternoon light slanted through western windows. The master bedroom felt different now, knowing Augustus and Evangeline had shared these spaces in stolen moments. The four-poster bed dominated the room, its headboard showing carvings of flowers and vines in geometric patterns that revealed themselves slowly. Four small hearts marked the corner posts, so subtle they were almost invisible in the overall design. Where two become one. Thaddeus studied the hearts, understanding dawning. Diagonal. Opposite corners join in the middle. He pressed the top left heart. Nothing. Then reached across with his other hand, pressing bottom right simultaneously. A click beneath the bed, mechanical, uncertain. They looked at each other, hearts racing with discovery. Moving the bed required all of Thaddeus's strength, and Desmond pushing from the other side. The frame scraped across floorboards, loud in the quiet house, revealing what lay beneath. A section of floor showed a heart shape inlaid in lighter wood, nearly invisible unless you knew to look straight down. The grain was different. This board added after the original floor was laid. Thaddeus pried gently with his pocket knife. The board lifted, revealing a metal box underneath. The brass key fit the lock like it was coming home. The lid resisted, rust and time fighting against discovery. Then it opened with a groan that sounded almost alive. Photographs first, maybe a dozen, showing a love story told in stolen moments. Augustus and Evangeline by the river, clothes suggesting early 70s, her laughing at something he'd said. A picnic in a meadow, spring flowers making a carpet around them, Augustus holding an infant, joy and sadness warring on his face. Later photos showed Daniel at 2, 3, 4, always with Augustus in the background, unable to be close, unable to claim what was his. Letters tied with ribbon, Evangeline's elegant handwriting filling pages with longing and regret. Thaddeus read one dated April 77, her words reaching across decades. My love, Sterling suspects everything now. He found our letters, not all thankfully, but enough. He's threatened me, says he'll take Daniel away if I don't cooperate with his plan to blame you for the irregularities at the mill. I fear what he might do to you, to us. Please be careful. If anything happens, remember our special place, where water meets stone. Everything that matters is there. Forever yours, E. A wedding ring, simple gold with a small diamond, engraved inside with C and S, and a date that meant nothing until Thaddeus realized. The S was for Evangeline's middle name, not Sterling. This was her real wedding, the one her heart recognized even if law didn't. A note from Augustus, ink still bold against cream paper. For my grandson, when he finds his Evangeline. True love transcends time and betrayal. Wear this with pride. Thaddeus's throat tightened, holding evidence of a grandmother he'd never known. A grandfather who'd waited decades for this exact moment. He looked at Desmond, seeing 4 generations compressed into an 8-year-old's curiosity. Your great-grandparents loved each other very much, buddy, but they had to hide it to protect their family. Like Mom had to choose between us and her job in California? The comparison cut deeper than Desmond knew. Something like that, but Augustus and Evangeline never stopped trying to do the right thing, even when it was hard. That's what matters, right? Even when it's hard. At the bottom of the box, wrapped separately, was another key. Smaller than the first, different symbols engraved along its shaft. Waves, a rocky outcropping, water meets stone, just as Evangeline had written. Desmond ran to the tower room, looking out over the property. "Dad, the river! I can see big rocks." Thaddeus joined him at the window, 200 yards behind the mansion, where overgrown gardens gave way to forest. A river glinted silver in the fading light. A limestone outcropping was visible even from this distance. That's where we go next. But not tonight. Tomorrow, after work. They slept easier that night, the weight of discovery somehow lighter than the weight of not knowing. But Thaddeus woke once to the sound of a car on the gravel drive. Through the window, he saw taillights disappearing, too far away to identify. Someone watching, someone waiting. Morning brought clouds heavy with promised rain. Thaddeus worked at the Robinson house while weather held, making progress on the crown molding that felt like meditation. Precision work demanded full attention, leaving no room for worries about the past or future. Just present moment, wood and blade and practiced hands creating something that would last. His phone rang at lunch. Lucian Crowe, the voice smooth as the expensive suit he wore. "Mr. Brennan, I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to follow up on our conversation. I'm still not selling. I expected you might say that, which is why I've brought a revised offer. $200,000, Mr. Brennan. Double the original offer, well above any reasonable valuation." The number was staggering, enough to change everything, solve every problem, give Desmond opportunities Thaddeus had never imagined. That's very generous. It reflects Crowe Enterprises' strong interest in developing that hillside. Lucian paused, and Thaddeus heard calculation in the silence. "I should mention that our assessment team has identified several code violations requiring immediate attention. The electrical system alone would cost $50,000 or more to bring up to modern standards." "Is that a threat, Mr. Crowe?" "Not at all. Simply information any responsible property owner would want to have. Ashmont may be a small town, but building codes are still enforced. I appreciate your concern, but I know quite a bit about building codes and historical property exemptions." Something shifted in Lucian's voice, recalculation happening in real time. "You've done your homework, I respect that, but I hope you realize what you're undertaking. Restoration of that magnitude requires resources most people simply don't have. I'm aware of the challenges." The line went quiet for a moment, and when Lucian spoke again, his tone had changed. "My mother worked in that house, Mr. Brennan. Did you know that? Before everything fell apart, before Augustus destroyed our family, Evangeline Crowe called Hartwell Manor her second home." Thaddeus said nothing, understanding Lucian was revealing more than he intended. "She died because of Augustus Hartwell. Suicide. I was 16. The pain in his voice was real, unvarnished by corporate polish. "So forgive me if I'm not sentimental about his legacy. That man broke my family, and I've spent my life trying to restore what he destroyed." The call ended without goodbye, leaving Thaddeus staring at his phone and understanding the fight ahead would be more complicated than simple business. That afternoon, storm clouds massed on the western horizon as Thaddeus and Desmond made their way toward the river. The path through the gardens was overgrown, wild roses creating walls that caught at their clothes. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity that had nothing to do with weather. The limestone outcropping rose 8 feet from the riverbank, moss-covered on the north face, weathered smooth by centuries of water. The river itself was narrow but swift, clear enough to see stones on the bottom. Desmond found the symbol first, pointing at the heart carved 3 feet above the waterline. "There, Dad." Weathered but unmistakable, the heart matched those on the key. Below it, a small depression the exact size of the second key's shaft. Thaddeus waded into the river, cold water shocking through his boots, current stronger than it looked. He inserted the key, felt it seat perfectly, turned it clockwise, heard grinding deep within stone. A section of rock shifted inward, revealing a cavity lined with copper to keep out moisture. The waterproof container was military grade, sealed against elements and time. The combination lock was already set to the right numbers: 51067. Daniel's birthday, again. Augustus ensuring only family could open what he'd hidden. Inside, everything that mattered: financial documents showing 7 years of embezzlement, Sterling Crow's signature on transfer authorizations, moving company funds to offshore accounts. A notebook in Augustus's handwriting, detailing conversations, transactions, dates and times, and witnesses. A reel-to-reel tape labeled Insurance, May 1st, 77, in permanent marker that had barely faded. Bearer bonds, dozens of them, in denominations that made Thaddeus's hands shake. 800,000 in face value from 1977. With compound interest over 45 years, the value would be astronomical. Bank documentation from Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, account numbers and access codes written in Augustus's careful script. A letter addressed to his future grandson. "If you're reading this, I've either died or disappeared. Sterling Crow forced my hand. He embezzled millions while plotting to blame me. When I threatened exposure, he threatened my son, your father, and Evangeline. I chose their safety over clearing my name immediately, but I ensured truth would survive. These bonds represent my legitimate savings, converted to untraceable form. Use them wisely. The recordings prove Sterling's guilt. But remember, this fight isn't about revenge. It's about justice for the 2,000 workers Sterling destroyed. Justice for this town. Build something better from these ashes." That's the Hartwell legacy. With love across time, Augustus. Thaddeus sat on the riverbank, holding his grandfather's words, while Desmond examined the bearer bonds with 8-year-old fascination. The weight of it was enormous. Proof of innocence, means to fight, responsibility to set things right after decades of wrong. We're rich? Maybe, but that's not why this matters. Thaddeus pulled his son close. This matters because Augustus was telling the truth, because the town needs to know what really happened, because sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, and you do it anyway. Movement in the trees made them both turn. Lucian Crow stepped from the forest, suit jacket snagged by branches, expression showing he'd been watching long enough to understand what they'd found. "Clever, Mr. Brennan. Very clever. You found it in 3 days. I've been searching for 20 years. How long were you watching?" "Long enough to know you discovered Augustus's cache." He moved closer, eyes on the waterproof container. "Blood tells, I suppose. Family instinct leading you where intellect couldn't. What do you want, Lucian?" "What's rightfully mine. What Augustus stole from my family before he disappeared." His composure was cracking, corporate veneer showing stress fractures. "My father built Crow Enterprises from nothing. Augustus Hartwell destroyed him with false accusations, then vanished with money that should have gone to workers, to my mother, to me." Thaddeus stood, putting himself between Lucian and Desmond. "The evidence here says Sterling was the one stealing, that he framed Augustus to cover his own crimes. Evidence Augustus manufactured." Lucian's voice rose. "You can't trust anything that man left behind. He was a fraud, a thief, and a homewrecker who destroyed my family. Your mother loved him. That's not fraud. That's just life being complicated." The words hit Lucian like a physical blow. His face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Don't presume to know about my mother. Don't pretend Augustus was some kind of martyr. He seduced a married woman, fathered a bastard, then disappeared when his crimes caught up with him. Or he disappeared to protect that child, to protect your mother from Sterling's temper. Thaddeus held his ground, to preserve evidence until the right time to use it. Lucian pulled out his phone, dialing without breaking eye contact. Jim, proceed with the inspection tomorrow morning. Full code enforcement, no exceptions. He listened briefly. Yes, I understand it's a historic property. No, no exemptions. If it's not up to code, I want it condemned. He ended the call, smile cold and certain. Jim Parker is the county building inspector. By this time tomorrow, that mansion will be declared uninhabitable. You and your son will be looking for a new place to live. You can't do that. I just did. Unless you reconsider my offer. $200,000. You can be out of Ashmont by the weekend, start fresh somewhere else. His expression softened slightly, almost pleading. Please, Mr. Brennan, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'll think about it. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the wheels of bureaucracy start turning, and there's nothing either of us can do to stop them. Lucian walked away through the forest, leaving Thaddeus and Desmond standing by the river, with 45 years of secrets in a waterproof box. Did he mean it, Dad? Will they really take our house? He meant it, but we're not giving up that easily. They carried the container back to the mansion as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Inside, spreading everything across the library table, they took inventory of Augustus's legacy. The financial documents were comprehensive, showing exactly how Sterling had systematically looted Hartwell Steel. The notebook provided context, conversations Augustus had documented with the precision of someone who knew he was creating evidence for a trial that might never happen. The tape was the smoking gun, assuming it was playable after 4 decades. The bearer bonds were their future, if the banks would honor them. The bank accounts might contain millions, or might have been seized decades ago. Too many variables, too many unknowns. Cordelia arrived with dinner she'd prepared, taking one look at the spread across the table and understanding immediately. You found it. Everything Augustus promised was there. Thaddeus showed her the documents, watching recognition and vindication war on her weathered face. Proof Sterling was the thief. Proof Augustus was protecting his family. Proof this town was destroyed by greed wearing a respectable face. What will you do? I don't know yet. Lucian's trying to have the house condemned. Sheriff Whitlock might be able to help, but even he said Lucian owns this town in ways that matter. Not everyone. Cordelia's voice carried steel underneath the southern warmth. There are people here who remember what really happened, who never believed Sterling's lies but couldn't prove otherwise. If you're willing to fight, Thaddeus, you won't fight alone. The rain intensified, drumming on the slate roof, finding the 7 places Lucian had mentioned where leaks needed repair. They set out pots and pans to catch the drips, each one a reminder that the house was wounded, that restoration would require resources they didn't have, that one man with a briefcase could undo everything Augustus had planned. But sitting in the library while rain fell and his son slept upstairs and his grandfather's secrets surrounded him, Thaddeus felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Not hope exactly, something fiercer. Determination that transcended logic, the kind of stubbornness his grandfather Howard had been famous for. Augustus Hartwell had waited 45 years for the right person to find his truth. Thaddeus wasn't going to let him down. Morning arrived with Jim Parker's county inspection truck crunching gravel at 7 sharp. Thaddeus watched from the library window as the building inspector emerged, clipboard already in hand, expressions suggesting a man following orders he didn't necessarily enjoy. Parker was thin, balding, with frown lines that looked permanent. He approached the mansion like someone cataloging a condemned building rather than evaluating one for habitation. Sheriff Garrett Whitlock's patrol car pulled in behind Parker's truck before the inspector reached the porch. Garrett moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd spent 40 years understanding exactly how much authority he possessed and when to use it. His hand rested on Parker's shoulder, gentle but unmistakable. Jim, didn't know you had inspections scheduled today. Parker's face tightened. Emergency assessment. Code violations reported by concerned citizen. Who reported them? The flush creeping up Parker's neck answered before his mouth did. That's confidential information, Sheriff. Is it? Garrett smiled without warmth. Because I'm betting Lucian Crowe made a very persuasive phone call. Maybe mention those consulting fees Crowe Enterprises pays your firm for property assessments? Parker's clipboard lowered slightly. I don't appreciate the implication. No implication, Jim. Just observation. Garrett turned to Thaddeus, who'd emerged onto the porch. Mr. Brennan here is working with Silas Crawford on the Robinson restoration. Doing exceptional work, I'm told. Man who understands historical properties that well probably knows code requirements better than most inspectors. I've filed preliminary paperwork with the State Historic Preservation Office. Thaddeus kept his voice level, factual. Emergency protective status while full application processes. Takes 6 to 8 months typically, during which all code enforcement goes through their review. Parker looked between them, calculation visible in his eyes. I wasn't aware of any historic preservation filing. Submitted electronically 2 days ago. Confirmation email came through yesterday. Thaddeus pulled out his phone, showing the official response from the state office. In the meantime, property is protected from local enforcement actions without state approval. The inspector's shoulders sagged microscopically, a man realizing his assignment had become more complicated than promised. I'll need to verify this with the state office. Of course. Garrett's smile widened. Take your time. I'm sure they'll have record of Mr. Brennan's application. Might take a few days for them to respond, being a state bureaucracy and all. Parker retreated to his truck, clipboard clutched like a shield. Through the windshield, they could see him making phone calls, frustration evident in his gestures. After 20 minutes, he drove away without conducting any inspection. That won't stop Lucian. Garrett leaned against the porch railing, testing its stability with professional habit. Just buys you time. Time is all I need. Thaddeus showed the sheriff the waterproof container's contents, spread across the library table inside. Garrett examined each document with the careful attention of someone who understood evidence, who knew the difference between proof and allegation. This is substantial. Sterling Crowe's embezzlement documented over 7 years. The notebook entries, if verified, establish a pattern. The tape could be decisive if it's playable. I need equipment to play it. The reel-to-reel format from '77, not many places still have working players. Evidence locker at the station has one, from when we used to record witness statements. Garrett pulled out his phone, making a call. Brought it out of storage last year for a cold case. Still works. Can you get people to listen? The workers who lost everything, the families Sterling destroyed? I can try. But understand, Thaddeus, this town has lived with one version of history for 45 years. Lucian Crowe employs 200 people directly or indirectly. Challenging him means challenging their livelihoods. Then we make it about truth, not revenge. Augustus didn't leave this evidence to destroy Lucian. He left it to clear his own name and help rebuild what Sterling tore down. Garrett studied him for a long moment. You sound like your grandfather. Howard Brennan had that same stubborn integrity. Made him difficult to work with sometimes, but you always knew where you stood. By noon, Cordelia had worked her network through every church group, coffee klatch, and retired workers association in Ashmont. Former Hartwell Steel employees began arriving at the mansion in 2s and 3s. Men in their 70s and 80s who moved with a careful deliberation of age, but whose eyes still held the sharpness of people who'd built things with their hands. Their wives came too, women who'd stretched paychecks and raised families on Steeltown wages that disappeared overnight when Sterling closed the mill. Walter Grayson had been floor supervisor, 32 years at Hartwell Steel before the closure. His hands showed burn scars from molten metal, arthritis from decades of physical labor. He examined Augustus's financial documents with reading glasses perched on his nose, comparing dates to his own memories. This transfer here, March 76. That's when our equipment budget got slashed 40%. Sterling said it was economic pressures, steel prices dropping. The anger in his voice had been aging for decades. But the money was there. He was stealing it while telling us to tighten our belts. Mary Chen's husband had died 5 years after the mill closed. Heart attack at 53 that she blamed on stress and lost purpose. She held Evangeline's letters with hands that trembled slightly. I knew her. Mrs. Crow used to volunteer at the library, always kind, always sad. We thought she was unhappy in her marriage, but nobody talked about such things then. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Sterling had a temper. Everyone knew, nobody said. By 3 o'clock, 20 former workers and their families crowded the mansion's front rooms. Garrett arrived with the reel-to-reel player, setting it up in the library where Augustus's evidence surrounded them like accumulated proof of a trial that had never happened. The tape threaded onto the ancient spools, brown oxide coating still intact after being sealed in waterproof protection for 45 years. This recording was made May 1st, 1977, 2 weeks before Augustus disappeared. Garrett's voice carried the formal weight of official testimony. The voice you'll hear is Sterling Crow, recorded without his knowledge during a private conversation with Augustus Hartwell. The play button clicked down. Static hissed, then voices emerged from across the decades. Sterling's voice, smooth and confident, with the arrogance of someone who believed himself untouchable. The arrangements are complete. Swiss accounts established, final transfers done by month's end. Hartwell Steel's most valuable assets will be liquidated through our shell companies before anyone realizes what's happening. Augustus's voice, closer to the microphone, controlled but carrying tension underneath. And the workers? Their pensions? The promises we made? Sterling laughing, a sound without humor. Don't be naive, Augustus. Business is business. They want security. They should have chosen different careers. The smart ones will find other jobs. The rest aren't my concern. Augustus, anger barely restrained. I won't let you do this. I've documented everything. The false accounts, the offshore transfers, the shell companies. If this goes public, you'll face criminal charges. Sterling's voice hardening to something cold and final. Nobody will believe you. I've already planted evidence of your embezzlement, your signature on transfer authorizations, backdated memos in your handwriting. It's your word against mine, and I own 3 county judges and the district attorney. Augustus. So that's it? You steal millions, destroy thousands of lives, and walk away clean? Sterling, matter of fact in his cruelty. That's how the world works, Augustus. The strong take what they want. The weak suffer what they must. You're an idealist, and that's why you'll lose. Now you have a choice. Sign over your shares at the price I'm offering. Resign quietly. I'll let you walk away. Refuse, and I'll destroy you. Your reputation, your freedom, your family. The tape continued, Sterling detailing exactly how he'd frame Augustus, exactly how he'd manipulate the investigation, exactly how he'd ensure Augustus took the blame, while Sterling emerged as the betrayed partner, forced to save what he could from his former friend's perfidy. When the recording ended, the room held silence heavy as stone. Walter Grayson's face had gone red, hands clenched into fists that shook with rage too long suppressed. That son of a bitch. That goddamned lying son of a bitch. We lost everything because of him. My pension was supposed to be $800 a month. Got $200 when the mill closed. Sterling said the company was bankrupt, that there was nothing left. The money was there. Thaddeus's voice cut through the rising anger. Sterling stole it, hid it, then closed the mill and blamed economic conditions. And he let Augustus take the fall rather than face justice himself. Why should we believe this? A woman in the back, younger, maybe 50, someone who'd inherited the town's broken promises rather than living through their breaking. For all we know, Augustus made this tape himself, faked Sterling's voice. Garrett stepped forward, his authority carrying weight. I've worked law enforcement 40 years. That's Sterling Crow's voice. I'd stake my reputation on it. And these financial documents can be verified. Account numbers, transfer dates, bank records that still exist. What good does it do us now? Walter's anger had shifted to something more bitter. Sterling's been dead almost 40 years. Augustus disappeared. We can't get our pensions back. Can't get those years back. Can't bring back the men who died from stress and shame, thinking they'd failed their families. Number. Thaddeus met his eyes. But we can clear Augustus's name. We can let this town know the truth about what happened. And we can use the resources Augustus preserved to start rebuilding. What resources? The bearer bonds Augustus converted before disappearing. With compound interest over 45 years, they're worth approximately $18 to $20 million. The number landed like a physical impact. Heads turned, whispers rising. Augustus left instructions. This money isn't for revenge, it's for justice, for rebuilding what Sterling destroyed. Thaddeus pulled out his grandfather's letter, reading the key passage aloud. Build something better from these ashes. That's the Hartwell legacy. Cordelia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs. There's going to be a town council meeting tomorrow night. Emergency session. I suggest we pack the hall and present this evidence publicly. Let everyone in Ashmont hear what really happened in '77. Lucian Crowe will fight this. Mary's voice was quiet but certain. His entire life has been built on Sterling's version of events. Proving his father was the real criminal will destroy him. Then maybe it's time he learned the truth. Garrett's expression was grim. Lies don't become truth just because they're old. That evening, Thaddeus sat in the library while Desmond slept upstairs. Rain had started again, the same 7 leaks dripping into strategically placed containers. He was examining the bearer bonds, calculating and recalculating their potential value, when headlights swept across the windows. A car approaching after dark, moving slowly up the gravel drive. Lucian Crowe emerged alone. No lawyers, no corporate armor. He looked diminished somehow, shoulders carrying weight that hadn't been visible before. Thaddeus met him on the porch, hand on the doorframe, not inviting him in. I heard about tomorrow's town council meeting, the rumors about what you found. News travels fast. In small towns, it's the only thing that does. Lucian's usual polish had worn thin, revealing something raw underneath. I need to know if it's true, if you really have evidence that Sterling embezzled from the mill. I have his voice on tape, admitting everything. Financial records showing exactly how he did it. Testimony from Augustus documenting the whole scheme. Lucian's face went pale in the porch light. That's impossible. My father was many things, but not a thief. Your father was exactly a thief. He stole millions while destroying 2,000 families. Then he blamed Augustus to avoid consequences. Lucian sank onto the porch steps, expensive suit forgotten, sitting like a man who just watched his entire foundation crack. If that's true, then everything I believed about my childhood, about my mother's death, about why I've spent 20 years building Crowe Enterprises. He looked up, and his eyes held something that might have been tears or might have been fury. I've been fighting the wrong enemy my entire adult life. Your mother knew. Thaddeus descended the steps, sitting beside him despite everything. Cordelia has a letter Evangeline wrote before she died. She'd learned the truth about Sterling's crimes. That knowledge, plus her grief about Augustus, destroyed her. Lucian's hands were shaking. I was 16 when she killed herself. Found her in the bathtub, sleeping pills and vodka. She left no note, no explanation. Just silence. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Thaddeus meant them. No one should carry that kind of loss. They sat there as rain intensified. 2 men connected by lies their fathers had told, or been told. By a history neither had chosen, but both had inherited. Finally, Lucian stood, brushing water from his suit with automatic gestures. Play the tape tomorrow. Let the town hear it. His voice was hollow, scraped clean of everything but exhaustion. I won't fight you. Can't fight you, not with that kind of evidence. But understand, Mr. Brennan, that you're destroying more than just my father's reputation. You're destroying the story I built my entire identity around. Sometimes truth costs everything, and we pay it anyway. Thaddeus stood as well. Augustus could have fought Sterling directly in '77, could have gone to the authorities with what he knew, but he chose differently. Chose to protect the innocent, even if it meant dying with his name ruined. That's the legacy I'm trying to honor. Lucian walked to his car, paused with the door open. My mother loved Augustus Hartwell, didn't she? Actually loved him, not just an affair. Yes, according to her letters, yes. Then she died believing she'd betrayed a good man for a criminal one. The pain in his voice was physical. That's the truth I have to live with now. The Mercedes pulled away, taillights disappearing into rain and darkness. Thaddeus remained on the porch, understanding that tomorrow would break something that had held for decades, and not knowing if what came after would be better or just different. The Ashmont Community Center filled beyond capacity by 6 o'clock. 180 people crammed into a space designed for 120, standing room only along the walls, people crowding the doorway trying to hear. The town council sat behind their table at the front, 5 members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Lucian Crowe sat front row with 3 lawyers in expensive suits, their briefcases like weapons waiting to be deployed. Sheriff Whitlock opened the meeting with formality that barely concealed tension. We're here to present new evidence regarding events from May 1977, specifically the disappearance of Augustus Hartwell and subsequent closure of Hartwell Steel. He introduced Thaddeus, explaining the inheritance, the family connection, the discoveries in the mansion. The murmur through the crowd was river-like, flowing and constant. Lucian sat motionless, face unreadable. Before we proceed, I want to establish Mr. Brennan's credibility. Garrett's voice carried authority that silenced whispers. The financial documents he discovered have been verified by independent forensic accountants. The tape recording has been authenticated by audio specialists. What you're about to hear represents factual evidence of crimes committed against this community 45 years ago. The reel-to-reel player sat on a table beside the council, ancient and solid. Garrett threaded the tape, and Sterling Crowe's voice filled the community center. People who'd known him alive flinched at the sound. People who'd only heard stories sat forward, hearing history speak directly across the decades. When the tape ended, Walter Grayson stood in the middle rows. That's why our pensions vanished, why the equipment kept breaking down, why Sterling kept saying we had to accept pay cuts while he drove a new Cadillac every year. The tremor in his voice spread to his hands. He was robbing us blind while blaming Augustus Hartwell for imaginary crimes. Another worker rose, then another, voices overlapping with rage and grief and validation of suspicions they'd carried for decades. The lawyers whispered urgently to Lucian, but he waved them to silence, standing slowly. The room quieted, everyone turning to see how Sterling Crowe's son would respond. That's my father's voice. Lucian's words dropped into silence like stones into still water. I recognize it. And what he's saying, he paused, struggling visibly. What he's saying is a confession to crimes I've spent my life denying existed. One of the lawyers stood. Mr. Crowe, I strongly advise against any public statements. Enough. Lucian turned to the lawyer, and his voice carried steel underneath the exhaustion. I'm done with lies, done protecting a legacy built on theft and manipulation. He faced the assembled crowd, these people whose families his father had destroyed. I believed Augustus Hartwell was a criminal, believed my father was the victim of betrayal. I've spent 20 years building Crowe Enterprises to restore what I thought Augustus had stolen. He gestured at the reel-to-reel player. But that tape proves I was wrong. My father was the thief. Augustus was innocent. The admission seemed to cost him something physical. His shoulders sagged, hands gripping the chair back for support. My mother killed herself because she knew this truth and couldn't live with it. She loved Augustus, and she died thinking she'd betrayed him for a man who turned out to be everything Augustus was accused of being. Lucian's voice broke slightly. That's the legacy I actually inherited. Mary stood in the back row. Your mother was kind to me, to all of us at the library. She didn't deserve what Sterling put her through. No, she didn't. And neither did Augustus. Neither did any of you. Lucian looked at Thaddeus. I owe you an apology, Mr. Brennan. I tried to force you out, to bury evidence, to continue the lies my father started. I was wrong. The town council members exchanged glances, uncertain how to proceed when the antagonist had surrendered before battle was truly joined. The crowd's anger had shifted to something more complex, understanding that Lucian himself was a victim of Sterling's crimes, though a privileged one. Cordelia rose from her seat, her age and dignity commanding attention. The question now isn't about the past. That's settled. The question is what we do going forward. Augustus left resources specifically to help rebuild this community. Thaddeus Brennan has those resources. The question is whether we help him use them properly. Thaddeus stood, feeling 200 pairs of eyes assess him. My grandfather converted his legitimate assets to bearer bonds worth approximately $18 to $20 million in today's value. His instructions were clear. Use this money for justice, not revenge. Use it to rebuild what Sterling destroyed. He looked at the former workers. I can't give you back your pensions, can't return the years you lost, but I can help create something new. He outlined his proposal. Convert the abandoned mill to a vocational training center. Modern construction techniques combined with traditional craftsmanship. Invest $10 million from Augustus's funds as endowment. Create 200 jobs within 2 years. Not minimum wage retail, but skilled trades with real futures. And I'm asking Crow Enterprises to partner in this effort. Thaddeus turned to Lucian. Your company has resources, infrastructure, connections. My inheritance has capital and moral authority. Together, we could actually accomplish what Augustus envisioned. The room erupted, some shouting approval, others objecting, many simply trying to process the whiplash from confrontation to collaboration. Lucian stood motionless, lawyers whispering urgently, clearly advising against any commitment. Why would I do that? His voice cut through the noise. My company was built on money Sterling embezzled. Partnering with you means admitting Crow Enterprises Foundation is illegitimate. Yes, Thaddeus held his gaze. It means admitting the truth and choosing to build something better anyway. It means turning your father's crimes into something redemptive. It means giving this town a real future instead of minimum wage retail pretending to be revitalization. One of the lawyers stood again. Mr. Crow, this would expose the company to massive liability. Potential lawsuits from workers, from shareholders. I don't care. Lucian's words were quiet, but absolute. For 20 years, I've been building the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. Maybe it's time I built something that actually matters. He extended his hand to Thaddeus. Partners, complete financial transparency, independent oversight board, former workers get seats at the table, and Augustus's name gets cleared publicly with no ambiguity. Thaddeus shook his hand, feeling the room's atmosphere shift from confrontation to possibility. The town council voted 6-1 to approve the partnership, with only Warren Mills dissenting, citing concerns about timeline and feasibility. The meeting ended near midnight, with committees forming, plans sketching out, hope kindling in places that had held only ash for decades. Outside, as people dispersed into the Indiana night, Lucian caught Thaddeus by the truck. I need you to understand something. This doesn't absolve me, doesn't make us friends. You inherited Augustus's legacy. I inherited Sterling's crimes. We're doing this because it's right, not because the past is forgotten. Agreed. But maybe our children can inherit something better than we did. Lucian glanced back at the community center, where lights were finally going dark. My entire identity was being Sterling Crow's son, proving he wasn't the villain history claimed. Now I have to figure out who I am when that foundation is gone. You're whoever you choose to be from this point forward. That's the only inheritance that actually matters. 1 year transformed Ashmont in ways that statistics couldn't capture and photographs only hinted at. The old mill complex rose from industrial graveyard to become something Thaddeus could only describe as purpose made visible. Steel girders that had once forged Chicago's skyline now framed classrooms where young hands learned to read wood grain and calculate load-bearing tolerances. The brick walls Sterling had abandoned held welding stations and CNC machines, traditional joinery benches beside computer-aided design terminals. Progress wasn't replacing craftsmanship here. It was learning to speak the same language. The November morning brought clouds low enough to taste, air carrying the promise of winter that would arrive in earnest before month's end. Thaddeus stood in the training center's main hall, watching 85 students file in for graduation ceremony. Not the 100 they'd hoped for in those first optimistic planning sessions. Not even close to the 2,000 who'd once drawn paychecks from Hartwell Steel. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to prove that building something lasting required starting with what you had rather than mourning what you'd lost. 62 would walk across the stage today. The other 23 had dropped out or failed, unable or unwilling to meet the program's demands. Real consequences for real training. No participation trophies. No social promotions. Just the unforgiving mathematics of, can you do the work or can't you? 51 of the graduates already had job offers, positions scattered across 3 states where employers had learned that Ashmont Training Center on a resume meant something. Meant hands that understood that details mattered, that precision was its own form of respect, that building things to last started with caring whether they did. Main Street showed cautious signs of recovery. 7 new businesses where there had been empty storefronts. The for rent signs were coming down one by one, replaced by open flags and hand-painted shingles that suggested permanence rather than desperation. The population had crept upward by 200 souls, the first growth since 1979. Not an explosion, not a renaissance, just the slow work of undoing decades of decline, one decision at a time. Desmond sat in the front row beside Cordelia, 10 years old now and growing into Augustus's frame faster than Thaddeus was ready to accept. The boy wore the suit they'd bought for occasions that mattered, charcoal gray that would serve him through junior high if he didn't outgrow it first. His hands rested in his lap, calloused now from the woodworking he did in the mansion's carriage house workshop. Third generation of Brennan craftsmen learning that building things right required patience that 10-year-olds struggled with but eventually understood. The mansion had opened to tour groups 6 months earlier, its restoration complete enough to show what it had been and what it was becoming. Revenue from admissions went to scholarships bearing Augustus's name, helping kids whose parents couldn't afford the training center's modest tuition. The tower room remained Desmond's private space, but the rest had become something between museum and monument, a place where people could stand in rooms where secrets had waited 4 decades, and understand that truth had its own timeline, indifferent to human impatience. Lucian Crow entered from the side door, moving with less certainty than he'd shown that first day outside the mansion. Therapy was helping, he'd told Thaddeus last week, over coffee that neither of them particularly wanted, but both understood was necessary. Helping him separate Sterling's crimes from his own identity, helping him build something that wasn't just reaction against a father who'd never deserved the defense his son had mounted. Crow Enterprises had restructured significantly. 40% of its holdings transferred to a community trust that operated with transparency Sterling would have found incomprehensible. Lucian kept enough control to ensure ethical operation, but not enough to dominate. Partnership instead of ownership. Collaboration instead of conquest. The restructuring had cost them. A major contract lost when the fraud revelations went public, clients uncomfortable with the association, no matter how much Lucian tried to distance present from past. 30 employees laid off in the downsizing that followed, families disrupted by consequences that traced back to Sterling's decisions 50 years prior. Some of those 30 blamed Thaddeus for digging up truths better left buried, for prioritizing justice over jobs, for caring more about the dead than the living. Walter Grayson led that opposition, his voice carrying weight in town halls and church basements, where people gathered to debate whether Augustus's millions could ever truly compensate for what Sterling had stolen. The arguments ran circles around themselves. Yes, the training center created jobs, but different jobs, requiring skills not everyone possessed, demanding commitments not everyone could make. Yes, truth mattered, but so did feeding families today, not in some theoretical future where justice had been properly served. Thaddeus understood their anger, even when it cut deep. He'd made choices that hurt people, even while trying to help them. No clean answers existed when you were trying to build something better from wreckage someone else had created. All you could do was keep building, keep trying, keep believing that doing right things for right reasons mattered even when the math didn't add up the way you'd hoped. Sheriff Whitlock took the podium, his uniform crisp despite the years it had been wearing him. The ceremony proceeded with practiced efficiency, names called, hands shaken, certificates presented in leather portfolios that would outlast the paper they protected. Families applauded their graduates, pride mixing with relief that this particular finish line had been crossed. Some of these students were second chances incarnate, people who'd stumbled through traditional education but found their footing when abstract concepts became concrete materials, when theory transformed into practice. The keynote speaker was scheduled for after the certificate presentations, before the final benediction. Thaddeus was reviewing his prepared remarks when movement at the back of the hall drew attention. A rental sedan had parked outside, visible through the tall windows. An elderly man emerged with the careful movements of someone rationing energy against a finite supply. He was perhaps 78, white hair thin across a liver-spotted scalp, eyes still sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, despite the decades they'd been witnessing. He wore a suit that had been expensive once, now dated in cut but maintained with obvious care. His tie was knotted with precision that spoke to decades of professional habit. Garrett saw him first, his expression shifting through shock to something like vindication. He crossed the hall quickly, speaking quietly to the old man before leading him to where Thaddeus and Lucian stood. "This is Ezra Thornton." Garrett's voice carried weight that silenced the nearest conversations. "He has something you need to hear." The microphone squealed feedback as Ezra took it, hands trembling slightly. The hall fell silent. 200 people suddenly focused on this stranger who'd interrupted their ceremony. "I was chief accountant at Hartwell Steel from 1965 to 77. His voice carried surprisingly well for someone his age. Projection learned from decades of speaking to boardrooms and factory floors. "Sterling Crow forced me to falsify the company books in 76. Told me if I refused, my family would suffer accidents. I was a coward. I complied." Absolute silence held the room now. Thaddeus felt his chest tighten, recognizing this moment as something Augustus might have planned, or at least hoped for. Truth arriving not when convenient, but when it could no longer be avoided. May 16th, 77. I saw Augustus Hartwell leave the mill for the last time. The old man's voice strengthened, losing its tremor as confession became testimony. I just finished creating the false evidence Sterling would use to frame him for embezzlement I'd helped commit. Augustus saw me in the parking lot, knew what I'd been forced to do. Instead of anger or accusation, he stopped and looked me straight in the eyes. Ezra paused, and something like tears threatened at the corners of his vision. He said, "Live truly, Ezra. Don't let fear control your life." Those were the last words Augustus Hartwell spoke to me. Then he got in his car and drove away, and I never saw him again. The silence broke with murmurs, people processing this addition to a story they thought complete. Lucian had gone pale, hands gripping the table edge. I've carried that guilt for 45 years. Ezra's voice dropped lower, forcing people to lean forward to hear. When I heard about this training center, about Augustus's grandson honoring his vision, I knew I couldn't die with that silence intact. Had to come here, had to tell the truth while I still could. He looked directly at Thaddeus. Your grandfather was the best man I ever knew. He chose to disappear rather than fight in a way that would destroy innocent people. That's courage I never had. And looking at what you've built here, at this community coming together, I think Augustus saw farther than any of us understood. Saw that someday, the right person would come to finish what he started. Did he say where he was going? Thaddeus's voice came out rougher than he'd intended. No, but he wasn't running, wasn't afraid. He knew exactly what he was doing and why. Ezra's hands steadied slightly, finding equilibrium in confession. I think Augustus understood that some fights can't be won in the moment, that sometimes you plant seeds for harvest you'll never see. And standing here today, watching these young people graduate, I think those seeds found good soil. The applause started slowly, building as people understood what they were witnessing. Not just a ceremony anymore, but a closing of accounts 45 years overdue. Ezra returned the microphone to Garrett and took a seat in the back row, unburdened in a way his posture made visible. Thaddeus's prepared remarks felt inadequate after that, too formal and planned for a moment that had become something else entirely. He abandoned his notes and spoke from the place where Augustus's blood ran through his veins. My grandfather believed that what we build matters more than what we inherit, that craftsmanship isn't just about skill, but about integrity, that doing things right costs more and takes longer, but creates value that outlasts us. He gestured at the graduates. You've proven that belief wasn't naive, wasn't outdated, wasn't some romantic notion about a past that never existed. You've learned skills that will feed your families and build your communities. You've earned something that can't be taken away by economic crashes or corporate restructuring. You've become people who know how to make things that last. He paused, looking at Lucian, at Cordelia, at the faces of workers who'd lost everything to Sterling's greed. This center exists because Augustus Hartwell chose truth over revenge, chose protection over vindication, chose to trust that eventually someone would come along who'd finish what he started. I don't know if I'm worthy of that trust. Don't know if what we build here matches what he envisioned. But I know we're trying. And sometimes trying is the only inheritance that truly matters. The ceremony concluded with handshakes and photographs, families clustering around graduates while caterers set up for the reception in the adjacent hall. Thaddeus found himself pulled into conversations with employers praising the program, with students thanking him for opportunities they'd never imagined, with skeptics admitting maybe this crazy idea might actually work. Ezra approached as the crowd thinned, moving slowly but deliberately. May I see the mansion where Augustus lived? Of course. We'll go now if you'd like. The drive took 10 minutes, Elm Street curving up through trees that were losing their last leaves to November wind. Ezra rode in silence, looking out at the town he'd fled 4 decades earlier, measuring changes against memories that had never quite faded. The mansion rose behind its fence, fully restored now, paint fresh in cream and burgundy trim, slate roof complete with no gaps showing. Lights glowed in windows as afternoon dimmed toward evening. Ezra stood on the gravel drive, taking it in with an expression Thaddeus couldn't quite read. He loved this place, not for its grandeur, but for what it represented. Permanence in a world obsessed with disposability. Craftsmanship when efficiency was the only metric that mattered. Come inside, there's something you should see. The library held the brass key in its display case, symbols that had guided Thaddeus through Augustus's puzzle, gleaming under LED lighting. Ezra examined it for a long time, recognition evident in how his fingers traced the glass, without quite touching. He showed me sketches once, plans for how he'd hide evidence, how he'd create a trail only family could follow. I thought it was paranoia. The old man's voice held regret sharp enough to cut. Turns out it was wisdom. He gave you a chance to refuse, to walk away from Sterling's threats. I didn't take it. Ezra turned from the display case, and I've wondered every day since if Augustus would still be here if I'd found that courage. If I'd stood with him instead of against him. He made his choice, knowing yours. Thaddeus's words came from understanding he'd developed over months of living with Augustus's legacy. He didn't blame you. The letter he left for me never mentioned your name, only talked about rebuilding, about justice, about helping people who'd been hurt. That doesn't absolve me, no, but maybe it suggests Augustus understood that fear is a kind of prison, and he'd rather break his chains than resent you for not breaking yours. They stood in silence as evening deepened outside, two men separated by generations, but connected by one man's vision of what mattered. Finally, Ezra extended his hand. Thank you for finishing what he started, for being the kind of man he believed would come. After Ezra left, Thaddeus stood alone in the library where this had all begun, where he'd first spread out Augustus's evidence, first understood the scope of what his grandfather had attempted. Through the windows, Ashmont's lights glittered against gathering dark. More lights than when he'd arrived. Not prosperity yet, but possibility, which was its own form of wealth. Desmond appeared in the doorway, still in his graduation ceremony suit. Mr. Thornton seemed sad. He carried a heavy burden for a long time. Sometimes confession is the only way to put it down. Did great-grandpa Augustus forgive him? I think Augustus understood that forgiveness isn't always necessary. Sometimes people just need permission to forgive themselves. Thaddeus pulled his son close. Come here, I want to show you something. He led Desmond to Augustus's restored study, the desk where his grandfather had sat planning this elaborate puzzle. In the bottom drawer, wrapped in the same oilcloth that had protected the first key, was a letter Thaddeus had found weeks ago, but hadn't been ready to share. Augustus had written it knowing he might never be found, might disappear into whatever fate awaited him. The handwriting was steady, despite what must have been extraordinary stress. To whoever inherits this house and unravels its mysteries. If you've read this far, you've followed a trail I left across decades. You've discovered truths about my life, my loves, my choices. You know now why I disappeared rather than fought, why I chose protection over vindication. I hope you understand I wasn't running from consequence, but toward a different kind of justice. The kind that builds rather than destroys. The kind that plants seeds for harvests I'll never see. Use what I've left wisely, not to punish the guilty, but to help the innocent. Not to settle scores, but to create opportunities. Not to look backward with anger, but forward with hope. And remember, the best inheritance isn't what you receive, but what you choose to build with it. With love across time, Augustus Hartwell. Thaddeus's throat tightened reading it aloud, the weight of that love pressing against his chest. Desmond was quiet for a long moment. He knew you'd come, knew exactly who you'd be. I don't think he knew me specifically, just knew that eventually someone with Brennan blood and a craftsman's hands would need this place badly enough to fight for it. He was patient enough to wait. Like how you're patient with me when I mess up dovetail joints? Exactly like that. Because Augustus taught me something I'm trying to teach you. That building things that last means accepting failure as part of the process. Means trying again until you get it right. Means caring enough about the outcome to invest time most people think is wasted. Snow began falling as they stood there, first flakes of winter drifting past the windows. Thaddeus walked to the glass, watching white accumulate on the lawn that Desmond had learned to maintain, on the gardens they'd restored together, on the fence they'd repainted last summer, covering everything in possibility, in the promise that what lay dormant might grow again when seasons turned. His phone buzzed. Text from Lucian. Swiss Bank confirmed final transfer. $34 million total. Board meeting Tuesday to allocate first grants. You should be there. The money was real. The partnerships were holding. The training center had graduated its first class. Augustus's name had been cleared. Justice, of a kind, had been served. Not the clean mathematical justice where every wrong was perfectly balanced by compensation, but the messy human version where you did your best with what you had and hoped it was enough. Desmond pressed against the window, breath fogging glass. It's really ours now, isn't it? The house, the town, all of it, ours to take care of, not to own. Thaddeus's hand found his son's shoulder. There's a difference. Ownership is about control. Stewardship is about responsibility. Augustus understood that distinction. It's why he built this place to outlast him. What are we building that'll outlast us? The question hung in the air while snow accumulated outside, transforming familiar landscape into something new. Thaddeus thought about the training center, about scholarships in Augustus's name, about students learning crafts that mattered, about Lucian choosing redemption over denial, about Ezra finally finding courage to confess, about all the small decisions that added up to something larger than any individual choice. We're building the same thing Augustus built, the same thing my grandfather and your great-great-grandfather built. Not just houses or businesses or institutions. We're building the belief that doing things right matters even when it's hard. That craftsmanship is its own form of integrity. That what we make with our hands and hearts outlasts what we accumulate with ambition or inheritance. He turned from the window, meeting his son's eyes. And someday, when you're standing where I am, you'll build something even better. Because that's what legacy actually means. Not preservation, but transformation. Not maintaining the past, but using it to create a future worth passing on. Outside, snow continued falling across Ashmont, covering the scars of decline with temporary beauty that would melt and return season after season, indifferent to human plans. But inside the mansion, Augustus Hartwell had built to last. 3 generations of choices were being honored by a fourth, who was just learning that the best inheritance wasn't wealth or property or even truth. It was the responsibility to build something that mattered, something that would outlast its makers, something worthy of the sacrifices that had brought it into being. The brass key rested in its case, purpose fulfilled, symbols decoded. But in the workshop upstairs, new tools were being mastered. New joints practiced, new skills developing in hands that carried Augustus's blood and Thaddeus's teaching. The mansion's lights glowed against gathering dark, warm and steady, a declaration that what had been built to last was still standing, still serving, still teaching those willing to learn that some things matter more than profit or convenience or even time itself.